Thank you, Vicki, for the introduction earlier. As Vicki mentioned, I'm Jim Draper from Gale, part of Cengage Learning, and I've been in the business of publishing different types of things for about 25 years. I can tell you there's never been a more interesting or more challenging or more exciting time to do this. My colleagues in the industry, Reynolds and Chris, this morning I think gave you a very, very profound and insightful view of some of our particular interests as commercial publishers. I'll try to build on that a little bit today and lead us toward the concept of born digital. I need to make a true confession. I'm not an expert in born digital at all, as you're going to see in just a moment. But I think after some discussion with my colleagues, we have some insights we can share that might help shape some of the discussion. As you may know, Gale has been in the digital publishing business for many, many years. We've been publishers of primary source materials for about 10 years, as you can see from the slide behind me. As it happens, we actually started in this business with a newspaper archive, the Times Digital Archive. And it's been very successful. We're very pleased to have the relationship, and it's installed all over the world. This is true generally for all successful commercial ventures of this type or single newspaper. Gale's program, though, is not limited just to newspapers. Newspapers in the digital world for us constitute about 15% of our program. The rest of the content, as you can see, covers other areas, for example, photographs, manuscripts, all types of ephemera, and different collections. We have an expertise at this point, particularly in manuscripts, to develop, for example, the state paper online collection. Newspapers, however, even though they constitute only about 15% of our digital business, actually have the biggest footprint, as you can see behind me. We have this number of collections, as you can see, starting again with the Times Digital Archive, and continuing through to today with all kinds of new content, for example, the Illustrated London News, Financial Times, the Listener, the Picture Post, and a number of others. We're very active in acquiring new content, especially for single titles, and making them work together rather seamlessly. When I was thinking about today, I asked myself, what exactly is the publisher's role? By publisher, I mean a commercial publisher. Publishing really means to make something public. When I speak of publisher, I'm thinking of us as a commercial publisher that charges fees for our services, perhaps returns royalties to the supplier of the content, has a full sales staff, a technology staff, and all the apparatus of a business. We do a lot of things, and many of them are very much like what happens in a library or a more private or independent archiving institution. A few of the things, though, I think are rather unique to commercial publishing. Some of them are up here. They cross over into a lot of different places. I would call out particularly market sensing. One of the things that I think we're very good at is understanding what market potential is. The last thing in the world I want to do I would lose my job, which is problem number one. I certainly don't want that to happen. Secondly, it would be a commercial failure, meaning there was no real use for it. We have teams of people who go all over the place trying to understand the scholars. What is the most needed collection? And I ask myself, can I acquire that collection and publish that efficiently and effectively? It's a good commercial model. I also ask myself, what's in it for the supplier of the content and for the scholar? Because no relationship is any good unless it goes both ways. That's where other things on this list come into play. For example, revenues and royalty. You probably understood from the conversations this morning that publishers like Gale, typically, not always, it depends on the relationship, pay a royalty to the content supplier. I can't name the actual royalties. I can't share that with you. Paid to certain large institutions, they are enormous. They pump this money right back into their collecting strategy. This helps to sustain their preservation efforts. It's another point I would bring to bear. In several cases, we have gone into libraries and rescued content. We saw quite a lot about this earlier. Part of our mission as a publisher. I actually had a telephone call about 4 weeks ago from a rather well-known newspaper publisher. I can't name who this is. He came to me and said, "You don't know me, but I'm looking for your help. I have a complete newspaper archive stored here in my newspaper building, and it's in big trouble." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "It's all wet, soaking wet in big puddles in the basement." He came to me and he said, "I have this pile of newspapers in the basement sitting in big puddles. Can you help me?" I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I need to digitize everything." My suggestion to him was, first get them off the basement floor. It seems like a very obvious point, but we often are consultants to the owners of content who really don't know what to do. Last point I would take from this slide is sustainability. It came up quite a bit this morning. In other words, are services going to be around forever? As a commercial publisher, we are quite stable financially, and we don't make investments unless we believe we can sustain them, start to finish, to create the product and distribute it. We also have relationships with dark archive people who actually store our content off-site and on demand will supply it to us in the event of a catastrophe. So I want to walk you through, very briefly, one of our typical products to give you a sense of how we go about commercializing content and creating something useful to scholars. Has anyone heard of the Gale 19th Century British Library newspapers? Is this familiar? I hope so. Have you used it? I hope as well. I saw some hands go up, which is very, very encouraging. We have a relationship with the British Library, very good one, we've had it for many years, to digitize content there and publish it. Our 18th century collections online was largely sourced from there, and more recently our British Library newspapers began with what is known as the collection, covering some very, very important 17th and 18th century papers. We worked with the British Library and also with the JISC, Joint Information Services Committee. Seen some heads go up and down. Perfect kind of partnership for a company like Gale. We helped to create a product of great use to the higher education community, and we also helped the British Library develop a royalty stream and meet some of its objectives, similar to the ones you heard about at lunch today. We brought together in a single place a new search solution. It's been out several years. You can see some of the details behind me. One of the nicest things is that this evolved into a pay-per-view, another commercial model. I won't show it to you today, but as part of the arrangement with the JISC, this product is free to the higher education community in the United Kingdom. When you have questions around access, sustainability, and digital divide, this begins to address it to a certain degree. Now, we were quite successful with the first release of this, so decided to do a second. You can see some of the details here. It's called 19th Century BL Newspapers Part 2. Not just more of the same, as you can see. We bring curation, expertise, and boards of scholars to help identify which papers are of greatest value, how should they function within the collection. See some examples there. What's of interest to my mind is that Part 2, as I mentioned, isn't just more of the same. We have new newspapers, we have new cities covered, we have new geography. Most importantly, as we learned from our boards of advisors, we needed to balance our collection more effectively. This is an aggregation of a number of different papers. It was leaning a little bit one way, leaning a little bit too much the other way, both politically and geographically. Part 2 has been an opportunity to correct that imbalance. Now, if this is successful, we'll probably do a Part 3, Part 4, and Part 5. Still to be determined. That's the typical publishing model that a company like Gale uses. If we're well established, we continue to publish in the same area. One of the things we do at Gale and in any commercial publisher, and quite frankly, anyone who's creating a digital archive, is create value. We use that expression quite a lot in the office. Where do we create the value? It's not just in digitizing the content. There's actually quite a lot more to it, as you know. We're quite good, I think, at creating the collections and curating them. But recently, it became very clear that as collections grow and the number of offerings that we've created increases rather dramatically, they need to interoperate, and they all have to work together. We call it in the kind of lingua franca a cross-search. But in fact, what it does is allow you to interrogate the data in very different ways from any that could ever have been done before without this cross-search. You can see some examples of our collections up there. The main objective of this is to make the data work together. So an end user who might want to study July 7th, 1776 would go into the product and could browse papers from that date. It's a completely new kind of research and browsing and discoverability experience. All the collections work together. Might not surprise you to see that interrogating the data at many levels is also one of the objectives. You've heard quite a bit about metadata today. One of the core competencies of a commercial publisher like Gale is the ability to create this metadata and to invest in the future to bring together metadata in new types of ways. It enables scholarly research and scholarly discovery. In other words, as I think you know at this point, we're not just publishing pictures or full-text searchable pictures, but creating ways to bring the content together in absolutely unique format. The other thing I want to mention that I think commercial publishers do quite well, not just commercial publishers, but it's part of our core mission, is the curation and selection of content. It's one thing to say we'll publish the Financial Times. It's a very easy decision commercially. We think we can make money doing it. We know there's demand. We know how to do this correctly. It's another thing to bring together 19th century American newspapers. You heard earlier today about some of the selection processes people use. This is a collection, for example, of 700 papers. Which one should they be? For these types of exercises, we bring together boards of advisors. Here are just some examples to give you a sense of the kinds of things we do to make sure that the scholarly research needs are met. Now, some of these names are probably familiar to you. We work very extensively with boards to help understand what the need is. There's one example from the British Library newspapers, another for 19th century American newspapers. Again, we bring together distinguished boards. This is an expensive exercise. It takes time, it takes a great deal of effort and energy. Collect and select well. Just one more example. These are our advisors for 19th century United Kingdom journals. I included this collection here because, in Gale's mind at least, serials are all kind of alike. Newspapers tend to be more daily than weekly. Journals tend to be more weekly or monthly than daily. But serial publication and serial solving for those types of content as opposed to a monograph or a manuscript is one and the same. It's all in the same bucket of interest. So here are some of our examples for the 19th century UK journals product. You're wondering why so many advisors? Why does Gale do this? As I mentioned before, consulting on the content selection, that is job number one. Also on inclusion. What is the editorial policy? When we go into the field and sell a collection to a library, they're going to say to us, we're investing heavily here. How did you arrive at this content selection? It needs to be defensible. Also metadata and search expertise. The advisors help us understand that, actually sometimes create the taxonomy. Global perspective, but mostly they tend to be problem solvers. They understand best the research need. They can articulate it to the publisher, and the publisher does his or her best to implement accordingly. So this brings me to my last very small section, some of my own ruminations and ponderings on Unborn Digital. Can't help doing this, that picture. This looked kind of like me and my colleagues the other day as we were trying to ponder what this all means, because Gale is a publisher and many of us as archivists are publishing from microfilm or paper, as mentioned before, and not from a feed, literally a content or a data feed that comes from a publisher, that is allegedly the paper. And I say allegedly the paper because it probably isn't. And that's where the Unborn Digital challenge for a publisher like Gale arises. Our basic question is, what is being published? If I take a photograph of the Times from 1785, I know exactly what is there. It's got a headline, it has lots of articles, it's got classified ads, it has a certain arrangement. If I get a data feed, which is very often what Unborn Digital means, from a publisher, I don't know what's in there unless I analyze it and tear it apart. Can I bring it back together with an image, if there is even an image? So those are the questions. Which edition is it? Is it complete? Probably not. May not be, could be, do you know? How different is the HTML version, in other words, the kind of keyed text version, from the actual image of the picture itself? Do they correspond exactly? Only somewhat? What's the answer? Does it include all of the advertisements, all of the illustrations, all of the graphs, the charts, the photos? I know the work we've done in the 19th century that the most searched and accessed content of the 19th century are the classified advertisements. Social historians, they love it. They can see how much soap cost in 1820 and how the new formula came out in 1875. That's the stuff of theses and of real research. Can you do this with Unborn Digital? Also, we talked about gold standards this morning. To me, the question is, are any standards in place for this? I used to license content for Gale's periodical aggregations, which are HTML. And very often, the publishers who were licensing this content had no idea what was in it. Because, as was mentioned before today, I think very insightfully, that's not their job. They're worried about today's edition, and then they move on. Second set of questions. How will the end users interact with the content? It's quite one thing to understand what is the content. Second is, how will it interact with your existing products or solutions, and how will end users experience this? First of all, data is it? Very often, publisher-supplied metadata is quite strong. Other times, it's not strong at all. Publishing an editorial decision needs to be made in every case. Do I use this? Do I map it to another taxonomy? What do I do with this metadata? Will it integrate with existing collections? Question from before, but how will it integrate with the end user and research experience? Is there zoning of the articles? You all understand the concept of above the fold. It really, really matters, placement. Can you actually see this in certain born digital solutions? Can you understand the context here? Goes to placement as well. And last, are there effective coordinates where there is an image? I'm not assuming that there always is in born digital. Often there is, but not always. Are there coordinates that allow for good full-text searching so that you can find the word on the page, and if it's part of your function, have a hit term highlight or similar? To my mind, those are the questions. What is the content? What exactly are you getting with born digital? And how will it integrate in services? Many, many difficult questions here. Rather exciting, though. Kind of brings you right back to this place. I don't have answers for these questions. I know we're here today to talk about this, so I'm very glad to be here today. I can't solve that for you, but I can close with a tribute. You've all seen these guys before. This is a rather famous photograph. But I keep this picture hanging in my office because it reminds me of both the beautiful and humble roots of the newspaper business. I call these guys our distributors. And indeed, that's exactly what they are. These were the guys of the 19th century who stood on the street corners, and these guys never knew about digital. They actually built this business, and I salute them today. There you are. Thank you.